Welcome, everybody. Welcome to another essential conversation here at Wellbeings. We have a treat today. I'm very excited for our guest. Dr. Alex is in the house. Alex is got a Ph.D. She's LMFT. She is the founder of the clinical director of the Center of Healthy Sex in Los Angeles, which is a faculty for international. It's an international institute for trauma and addiction professionals. She's been the recipient of 2018 Women's Association of Addiction and Treatment SMART Award, the International Institute of Trauma and Addiction Professional Leadership Award, and the 2012 Society for the Advancement of the Sexual Health Carnes Award. By any chance, is that the Patrick Carnes Award?
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. Wow. He inspired me when I was a young scallywag, his work and his book. I still have it on my shelf. And she is the certified sex addiction therapist and supervisor. And this woman, everybody, if you don't know her, she's wrote so many books. She is such a wealth of lived experience and of knowledge. Some of her books are, she's wrote a workbook on designing and celebrating your sexual health plan, sex addiction as an effect of dysregulation, which is a neurological informed holistic treatment. Co-authored an AASECT award-winning book, The Mirror of Intimacy, Daily Reflections on Emotional and Erotic Intelligence. Daily Reflections on Emotional and Erotic Intelligence. I haven't got that book, but I'm going to get it. Sounds phenomenal. And then she's been a contributing author to the Clark Vincent Award-winning Making Advances, a comprehensive guide for treating female sex and love addicts, and also authored the Erotic Intelligence, Igniting Hot, healthy sex after the recovery to sex addiction. So I'm getting hot just reading out these titles here. So thank you for bringing me alive as I welcome you. Welcome.
Thank you, Nigel. It's nice to be here.
Wow, yeah, it's great to be here. And I'm curious, as I was sitting here feeling into today's sort of a start of hopefully a continual series of journeys together. I was curious to think about what started or sparked your interest. Was this something that happened very young in your life, or was this something that life happened in multiple of different ways that has you here helping men and women, and also specializing in helping men find their way through this world of intimacy?
Well, do you want the long version or the short version?
In between version.
In between version. Okay. Well, I grew up in a household that I would say my parents were insensitive. They weren't full-on abusive, and they themselves were trauma survivors. My father grew up under the Nazi occupation of his island of Crete in Greece. And my mother's parents were pretty traumatized immigrants. And so their attachment styles were not secure. My mother was pretty avoidant, and my father had a lot of PTSD that was untreated. And it was an arranged marriage, right? So here they are in the United States trying to put this thing together. And so I was born into that nest, if you will. And so I didn't get the nurturing and guidance that I really should have had. They were protective and they were responsible, but their marriage wasn't good. And it wasn't good really for my whole life until they finally divorced when I was in my late 20s, I think. And so as such, my sexuality, like every other teenager's, is coming online. I'm 14, 15. I don't know anything about boys or sex, but my body sure is responding to those feelings. And so I started becoming quite promiscuous in my teens, sneaking out of the house, having sex with people I didn't know, really putting myself in harm's way. And I'm lucky I wasn't harmed, actually. And so by the time I was, 18, I was out of the house, college, had a series of bad relationships, And I write about this in my sex addiction book, that, by the time I was 27, I'd been out of a 10-year relationship with someone who was 16 years older than me. And this relationship I got into afterwards was one where there was a car accident and he was killed. And that is what propelled me into psychotherapy. I didn't go because I wanted to go or I thought it was a good idea. I went because I had to go. I had no choice. And that's often when people get into therapy, is that humans have this tendency to be motivated by pain more than we do seeking our potential, unfortunately. So, it was just a series of one relational problem after another, and me not knowing who I was. I had no idea who I was in my late 20s. I felt quite lost, scared, kind of chronic low-grade depression, but didn't know why. And it was really through the therapeutic process that I started to come alive, that I started to feel again, feel integrated. I was fortunate that I had a really fantastic therapist. And, 5 years into that, I thought, wow, if you could make a living talking to people and helping them, seems like a good career to have. So one of the classes I loved the most in graduate school was on human sexuality. It really just put so many pieces into place for me. And by the time I graduated and started my internship, the only internship I could find in the field of sexuality or sexual health was in sex addiction treatment. And so that was in 1997, and that began my trajectory in the field of sexual addiction and compulsivity.
Wow. And what do you find, I suppose, for the people listening out there, there is been one of the most common things I meet in the treatment room is as across the board acceptance of dissatisfaction in the bedroom, especially in married couples, especially in long-term relationships. So I spoke to a few people today at one of my a group that I was running, and that was one of the questions that they said, like, one person said, well, you know what, that's just what happens. That's just what happens. It's not supposed to be. It's not. Don't. One person was sharing that they were feeling really, they were really struggling with the relationship because there was no aliveness in the bedroom. And someone else said, well, just get used to it. That's what happens. Just don't be complaining. It was very dismissive. And then there was a debate about it. And then one of them said, hey, Nigel, could you make sure that we mention that you can mention that today so we can understand? Because it feels like everyone, there was like split in the group of 10 people. 5 were like, no, surely we can allow yourself to be in a healthy sort of like enlivening sexual relationship, even if you're in a marriage for 20, 30 years.
Right. Well, this is a huge topic, Nigel. I mean, there's so many levels to this, but I think, first of all, it's 100% normal. This is a place where all long-term relationships get to. And part of the problem is that our focus, at least here in the US, but I think in the West, is really on performance, and it's on penetrative sex. That is the goal and that is the end point. And when you put that kind of pressure on the system, it's going to go flaccid, right? It's going to go limp, if you will. And so there's no way that you can keep it up for that over time. So one of the things that I talk to couples about a lot is starting from the beginning. There's always a high desire and a low desire partner. It's a systemic issue. If you and I are in a marriage and you want to buy a car and I don't, we don't buy a car. Because the low desire always has the power in the relationship. I want a baby, you don't. We don't have a baby. That's just how it goes. And so what happens is the high desire partner starts to pummel and pressure the low desire partner by buying books and sex toys and weekends away. And the low desire partner starts to dig in their heels because they feel pressured. And it's not that they don't like sex or want sex, it's just they want it differently. And typically we have mismatched sexual desire. So when people are dating and they're super on fire about each other, they have no idea what their partner really does and doesn't like. Everybody's just kind of slamming their bodies together and you orgasm and it works. But over time, we start to recognize or not that we're really quite different from each other. And, there are even a few books titled, I think Alan de Botton has a book called something like, Of Course You Married the Wrong Person, because we all marry the wrong person. Is what we find out once we get into the marriage. But the truth is, they're the right person because they're forcing us to look at our own issues. And so when people start to look at and get honest with themselves, the next task is to get honest with your partner. And that's not what happens. People blame and shame each other. They dig in their heels. They get angry. Somebody ends up cheating because they're really not in communication with each other the way they should be, which is really can be quite harrowing.
Yeah, what I was born into a culture that is a Western culture, but it's a Western culture that's, I was going to say, tinged with Catholicism, but I would say blanketed in a way when it comes to sexuality and promoting staying in a relationship, and just like, suppression, and avoidant and suppress
Right, that's right.
and saving face and being private and closing up. And that was another comment from someone in the group today. Just the struggle, of sex is bad. We shouldn't talk about it.
Yeah, and that leads, what you just were describing leads to so much resentment. And when you have resentment, you can't be open. Sex is about openness, open-heartedness. And without, first and foremost, you have to have trust and safety. And that is essential to establish, but it doesn't get established by way of sex. It gets established by way of conversations, by people recognizing that Barry McCarthy, who's a well-known sexologist in the States, talks about being an intimate team, that it's not, you're not the problem and I'm not the problem. Together we have differences. So how are we going to talk about them? Right? What kind of touch do you like? What kind of touch do I like? What are the conditions I need for safety? What are the things that scare me? Can we slow down? Can we just start with what would it be like to just touch each other's hands and to feel what that skin feels like, and to start to get to know each other in a very deep and intricate way? And that's what intimacy is. Intimacy is not sex. Anybody can put their bodies together. Somebody's doing it right now. Someone's having sex right this minute next door to us or across the street. So it's not rocket science. But what's challenging, what's most difficult, is this emotional intelligence, or what I call erotic intelligence, where you really are able to tolerate your anxiety and start to talk about what really turns you on. And it doesn't mean you want to do it. I wrote a paper a couple of years ago. It was for the American Journal of Play, and part of it was about rape fantasy. And I want people to hear this very carefully, that the number one fantasy that women in the States had between ages 20 and 40 was rape. But not one of those women want to be raped. So just because we have a fantasy about something does not mean we actually want that to happen in our lives. But what is implicit in the rape? It's submission, it's being taken, it's being dominated, right? And these are energetic polarities. You could say masculine and feminine polarities. But if we don't talk about that, right, then how are we possibly going to know? And when you start to talk about it, you start to infuse novelty in the system. It starts to get arousing psychologically, and that then leads people back to their sexuality with each other, because there's a carnal energy to it. And what you're talking about, that Catholic overlay, religious overlay, it kills all of that eroticism, really, all of that animalistic pleasure.
Yeah,
Because
I remember
we don't talk
whenever I
about
was,
pleasure.
yeah, like I early on in my training, and I was working with different psychoanalysts in relation, which are unusual people to be exploring in depth sort of healthy sex in a way that I found over the years. But one of the wonderful things that came true, and one of them was like that animalistic sex is something very much that is in our DNA since we're children, from the stage when we objectify the mother for the breast, where you become an object of pleasure,
Right.
and we go back into these states, as adults, and we have lovemaking, and then we have this other box that's also healthy, but it's, let's just say, with, as you named it there, like with the overlay of religion, let's just say, because it's not just Catholicism, it's made to be bad. It's
Right. So I guess we can't say the F word on this podcast.
Yes, we certainly can.
Okay. Well, right. There's fucking is what we're
Yes.
talking about. And what's important about this is that if you really understand the autonomic nervous system, which is the primary nervous system that runs the body, in order to get up over the arousal threshold, you have to be in what we call sympathetic arousal. Heart rate's beating, you're sweating, you've got some adrenaline on board, right? And in order to move towards orgasm, you have to be in that state, right? So it's intense, it's sweaty. And so to act like that is not happening is impossible, really. There's a lack of freedom in that. Instead of saying, well, we actually are mammals, we're animals, right? From the lower cortical part of the brain down, we are. And we've got these beautiful prefrontal cortexes that make us different from animals, where we have abstract thinking and reason and can be kind to each other. But when you're in bed, when you're having sex, you should be able to be all of who you are. But if you don't have consent built in on the front end, if these kind of conversations I'm talking about don't happen because people are too embarrassed to talk about it, you can't get to these places that we're talking about. It's not possible. The container has to be safe. And consent is not something you just do when you're dating. You do it in a marriage all the time. Can I touch you here? Where do you like to be touched? Where don't you want to be touched? And I honor that. If somebody's ticklish, or they had a wound there, or they were molested, right? We have to tend to each other in that way, because when you have a solid container, then the sky's the limit, so to speak.
Yeah, and it's a very common thing that I meet within. I don't do relationship work per se in my own clinic, but of course my work impacts the relationships that people are in.
Sure.
But what I notice a lot is the struggle that a lot of people who have been sexually abused. And I think in the West, we're slowly coming to realize the number is higher than we think.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And it's, I don't know what the number is in the States, but I forget actually what it is here in this very moment, but it's shockingly high. I don't know if it's like 3 out of 10, 4 out of 10 women, and slightly behind that is men. And it's getting closer with men because there's more men speaking up. But so and then when that comes later on in life, when they're in the marriage, and of course there's lots of complications with that,
right.
But it really affects this thing called intimacy.
For sure, because of the shame. And until somebody talks to somebody about the molestation, and I just want to highlight this and say this comes in many forms. There's something called covert incest that a lot of girls experience from their fathers, where their bodies are starting to develop, and he never touches her, but he starts to talk about her breasts or her rear end or how she looks in that clothing. Like he's objectifying her inappropriately, and it feels icky and invasive to her. And that starts to steal her sexuality. She doesn't feel safe with him. So it comes in that form all the way to somebody, literally penetrating their child one way or the other, or a neighbor or an uncle or, a religious person, I'm sorry to say. So it runs the gamut, and it's different for everybody. And we're all different. People are more sensitive than others, and some people can get over it easier. But you have to talk about it in order to deconstruct the shame so that you can take back your sexuality from that offender. Because as long as your sexuality shut down, they win, right? They won. They took it
Yeah.
from you, and it's an act of defiance and really social justice to go take it back, to reclaim your pleasure.
Yeah, because it's one thing, it's a traumatic thing, and a terrible thing for the abuse to take place in the first place.
That's
But
right.
it's even more harrowing to for it to affect the rest of your life in these ways where you become impotent of pleasure.
Right. And it's the shame that's the problem, because all children feel like it's their fault, or they did something wrong, or they're dirty, or if they told anybody, that person would run screaming from the room, as opposed to finding someone that you can trust, that will comfort you, that will be with you and tell you that it's okay. You didn't do anything wrong. That's really the beginning, is telling somebody if you've never told before.
Yeah, and anybody watching at the moment, and or live or in the repeat, and if you're being moved in any way and something's happening as you're hearing us talk about very essential topics here, then just take a moment and feel like, what is it that's actually starting to move in you, and what are you resonating with, or what's starting to happen, or what's starting to not happen as you hear us talk and share. And if some of this is unearthing some sort of memories and feelings, then please move towards someone that you feel safe, as Dr. Alex is saying, like, talk to somebody. And if you want to talk to a professional, please reach out to one. And if you want to reach out to us, then just Alex's details are below, and so you can send us a message and we can help connect, because this is we can't do this by ourselves,
Right.
and and we can't do marriage by ourselves. And we definitely can't work through this historical sort of invasions, intrusions by ourselves either. So excuse me, I'm really curious about, and by the way, I think in a sense, these could be particular headings that we could talk about in future sort of podcasts, where we would have a central theme. And again, anybody listening that has curious about wanting to hear about specifics about anything underneath the intimacy umbrella, then please send us a message of what you would like us to talk about, because it's such a big area, whether it's addiction, whether it's couples becoming more intimate, whether it's what is healthy sex, what isn't healthy sex, and the thousands of things in between that. But what I'm really curious about, Doc, is what are you seeing in your practice starting to emerge more and more over the years? That's something we could start to look at more closely today.
Well, I think, I don't know how it is culturally. I mean, I was just thinking, my understanding is that Ireland has moved towards a more secular way of being, since the time you were a child, and the wars and all of that. And I was thinking that, as a culture, you're coming out from under this religious overlay, like you said, that sex is dirty and it's wrong and it's bad. And so you've got generations of people working through intergenerational trauma about that. It's not like we don't have our problems here, believe me, we do. And it's such a big country, it's hard to say what the trend is, but there's something very tender about that, is what I was just thinking about, this intergenerational trauma of sexuality being repressed, and people in your generation coming forward and saying, I'm going to drop these shackles and come out from the shame and start to experience sexual pleasure, and teach our children about their bodies in a normative, pleasurable way. But one of the trends we're seeing here is open marriage, right? It's a big thing. There are books out now about designer relationships and consensual non-monogamy, and people are having a very hard time connecting in these intimate ways. It's too much work. The culture moves way too fast. Everybody, I mean, we're a capitalistic culture, so it's all, go, 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 spend, spend, spend. And so with that comes very little time to focus on a relationship. And, if you are going to take a trip somewhere, generally you prepare for it. You read books about it, you get out maps, you buy clothes that are suiting the climate. But people don't put that kind of energy on their sex life. They just marginalize it until it's dead, essentially. And so I think what's happening here is people want a quick fix, just like with everything else. And that quick fix becomes about, well, maybe we'll just open our marriage, which creates a whole host of other problems.
Yeah, I live most of the time in Bali, and
Right.
and for me, that was the first time, except some other rare occasions, where I came across the term polyamory, and where I started to have clients who were coming in sharing that they had multiple partners, and they were explaining to me why this was so important for them. A lot because of what you've just said, creating a designer relationship or relationships that give me exactly what I want when I want it. And and again, I think it's good to name that. My honest opinion is that out of a lot of them, I saw a lot of trouble that really created a lot of turbulence, that created a lot of suffering.
Yeah.
And a few of them were, and I'm going to use these terms that people may not understand or totally agree with, but whenever, and one man had showed me this, and then I'd seen it in a few other relationships, is when a polyamory couple, there was 3 involved, when everybody's soul was fully aligned. They had went through a lot of inner work to be able to come to this place of truth amongst themselves. And there was like a soul alignment that this was where everyone was in agreement and everyone was communicative, and it wasn't getting away from intimacy. It was moving towards intimacy. And that was rare because the amount of work one relationship is difficult.
Hard enough, right? Yeah. Well, that was beautifully.
If you really are aligned and you want to put that work in, it's like, okay, let's build 2 houses here. In a way, and I saw that it worked.
I think that's beautifully articulated. And the people that I've talked to the most about this that practice polyamory are psychologists, and they say it's an unbelievable amount of work. If you're going to do it well in the way that you're talking about, the level of consciousness, the amount of attending to each other is just, that's all they do. You just think about, like what you said, just making Christmas plans with your family and your wife's family, and what a nightmare that is. And then you throw like a couple more people into that. It's just a headache. It's a scheduling nightmare, it sounds like, more than anything. So yes, I think, right. A lot of people can do these things, but very few do them well.
Yeah, and again, it's this evolution towards rapid connectedness, as opposed to self-reflection and a sort of like understanding, a deeper wanting to be curious. And I think that's really important, that for us to come back and take the time and slow it down. And I think slowing it down is like the golden words here.
It is. It's like anything. It's like, moving from fast food back to slow food and slow cooking, and what it's like to make a beautiful meal that you've been preparing all day, that's been simmering and filling the house with scents. And then you sit down and you eat it in an intentional way. That's what beautiful sex is like. It's a preparation. And so it's better if you have sex once a week, once a month, that is sex worth wanting and worth having, than just kind of, this sort of dead thing that you kind of grope in the middle of the night and you're just glad it's over. And it's just about tension relief. I mean, if you want to release tension, you can masturbate. You don't really need your partner for that. And that's fine too. But why do you get together with a partner? What is the purpose of the communion, if you will?
I love how you put that, Doctor, because one of the things that I find in all aspects of the human psyche and development is this struggle with deadening or discharging. And there's a way in where there's a difficulty to awaken to the emotions, to be able to be with it, to accompany it. And in the bedroom, they go into the gym, or what, because I work a lot with bodybuilders as well. there's an habitual, it's just, I talk to couples and they do it 3 or 4 times a week, and it's like, it's robotic.
Right.
It's like, there's no real feeling, and it is a discharge. It's like, and one of our guys said in the group, says, "Hey, I was having a bad day, man. I needed to go and get a bit of relief." It wasn't about the connection. It was about discharging the built up anxiety in the body.
Right. And often their partners, their wives will feel used. She'll say, "Oh, I just feel used, or I feel like a sex object." And it's like, well, you are. That's what you're being used for. And if it's consensual and you come home and you say, "Look, I really just need to get off," and your partner says, "Okay," then it's a consensual thing. But this ability to really connect deeply we're talking about 2 very different experiences here. One that's highly intentional, one that's highly novel and highly arousing with someone that you've known forever, but you don't know at all, versus just getting off because you need to relieve tension or anxiety or a headache. And one's not better than the other either. I don't want to be judgmental about this. I'm just saying it runs the gamut. And there are also studies that show that mediocre sex begets more mediocre sex, and desire starts to tank because of that. So it's not good for a relationship.
Yeah, you pay the price eventually when it's like, it's almost like regurgitation. You miss out on the vitamins and the minerals after a while.
That's right. Yeah, that's true.
But and again, it's so again, anybody listening here, like there is another way, and I think that way that we are going to address in future podcasts is that there's a way that you can awaken. It's okay to have a discharge if it's consensual. It's okay sometimes to not want to have sex, which is like deadening a little bit, and if there's communication about that could be a very vulnerable thing in and of itself that could help you get closer. Talking about it, and where intimacy could be really developed in that area. And then there's another part which is in the middle, which is this awakening, this being with it and being connected, and through that process. That's how I see just emotions, for example, and emotions are a big part of when you get into this lovely, when you have 2 people that come together.
Right. Yeah. And then it's something very, very special and different.
Mm. And I had I forgot, I had this conversation with a young man last week as well. He was in his 60s, and the reason I said he was like a really young man, because he says, "I don't have any troubles with intimacy. I don't." He says, "I just seek out 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds, and we have one-night stands, and I never have any problems with erection. But if I'm in a long relationship, I have a problem with erections." And he was eternally, he's in, and he was coming to me for a separate thing, like his depression, and I was saying, maybe there's a link here. Maybe there's something that we could look at. And is that something that you could speak to? Is like the struggle and how it can backfire, and where you miss out, like you're not really getting fed. There's almost like you're getting something, but you're not. It's not about that.
Well, it's a limitation is what it is. Whenever sex is rote, when you can only do it one way or get off one way, there's a real limitation there. So he is, objectifying these young women that are old enough to be his maybe granddaughters, daughters, they're 20. And, it's easy to have sex with a stranger. It's easy to have sex with a 20-year-old body. Because it's highly novel and it's beautiful, and you don't have all of the pain of the history that you have with each other. And that pain and that history is also what can make something so deep and so rich, but that's not what you're getting. So it's sort of the difference between cotton candy and a multi-layered cake. You could put it that way. And so he's created an arousal template for himself that's about youth. and really getting off and using those young women for that purpose. But what he can't do is connect. So when he says he doesn't have a problem with intimacy, that's not true. He doesn't know what intimacy is. He doesn't have a problem having sex, with young bodies, but he doesn't know what it's like to make deep eye contact with a woman in his cohort, whether she's, 50 or even, late 40s or 60, and really make that soulful connection with her. Because he's being serviced. For him, it's all about sensation and not about connection.
That makes so much sense. I love how you put it, and and again, for anybody out there who's listening, like there is a way to allow this big word of intimacy or sexual connection that can really transform your life. And change because if we can change your way of being in a relationship with yourself first, I suppose, with this, let's start here a little bit, or let's explore this a little bit. This whole area around like what happens when you start to embark on a journey to want to improve or look at more closely what happens in the whole area of intimacy. What are some of the things you've seen that can start to happen in the individual, and then in the marriage, or in the relationship, and in the family that can happen whenever?
Right.
Because it's
well,
a big,
look, it is a spiritual path. It's a path. It's a portal like anything else is to personal growth and development. And it is, in our 20s, sex is about a drive. Right? You just see somebody walking across the street and you're aroused and you're ready to have sex. And then in 30s, people typically have children. So that's a whole other configuration taking place, and your energy and your focus is there. But really, as we start to age into our 40s, 50s, 60s, and even 70s now, sex becomes about the development of a self. Who am I? So many people I meet are dragging a 20-year-old sexuality around in a 47-year-old body. And it's like, wait a minute, you're not wearing the same jeans you were wearing at 20. Your hair's not the same. Why haven't you updated your sexual scripts? Why do you think your body should respond the way it did then? And who are you sexually? What do you like? Because bodies have moods and interests, and they shift and change. It's like, if you had chocolate chip cookies yesterday and you're just like sort of gorged on them, today you might be like, oh, I don't want any chocolate chip cookies. You might want a lemon bar or something different. But we don't allow ourselves the introspection or the thinking about, well, who am I actually sexually? And that's really the first step, is to get honest with ourselves. I have a new workbook coming out called What Turns You On, that's specifically about this issue. The whole workbook is about, what do you like? What don't you like? Why don't you like it? So that people can do some writing and get really clear about what that means for them, and then communicate it to a partner. And I've said this before, like if you are on a date with somebody, people talk about movies and what kind of food they like and where they like to travel, but no one says, oh, so hey, Nigel, what kind of sex do you like to have? Right? No one says that. And if I found out that you were like really, I don't know, into some, like you wanted to have sex with these flowers behind my head, I'd be like, oh, okay, that's interesting. I'm not into that at all. And so we would know going into it what we were, whether we were compatible sexually, but no one actually talks about that. Somebody might be, I was giving a talk once and some woman said that I had offended her because vanilla was her favorite form of sex. And I was talking about all these other sort of kinks and fetishes, and I didn't mean to offend her, but vanilla is, perfectly fine, but how do you let your partner know that? And what if your partner's a little kinky or into some kind of sensation play or role play? Are you open to that? Are you willing to stretch a little bit and find out who you are, even though it's uncomfortable for you? These are the kind of energies and boundaries that people have to play with in relationship with each other.
Yeah, like I think we've just come across something that I feel is huge. Just this segue here, just right in this landscape of going inward and really trying to find out like what you enjoy, like what brings you alive. Like again, anybody watching in this moment, let's just take a pause and like ask yourself that question: like, what is it that turns you on? What doesn't turn you on? And is fetishes part of it? Or is fetishes something that you haven't looked at because it's only in those movies and they're like, it's really bad. It's like, it's that the dark side of sexuality. Because I've had that in my clinical room before where people said, oh, no, that's, I've seen a movie about that's scary. You know, I've seen that, you know, and, you know, it's coming out more in movies these days where it's softening a little bit, but there's a whole, you know, we can sit and ask ourselves what brings us alive, and then we can, and if you open that door, you can look at an array of experiences that it's like another encyclopedia to take a look in and to explore. What's your what have you come across in this landscape? Are people slowly opening up to more sort of curiosities in fetishes and sort of?
Well, I think so. I mean, look, internet porn is ubiquitous. Everybody looks at porn, and porn has, you know, there are good and bad aspects to that. There's the exploitive side of it, but there's also, you know, people have started to see things that they never thought were possible before, or that have been normalized for them. You know, there was a time in the US where things like oral sex was considered sodomy. It was on the sodomy books, and it was arrestable behavior. So it did start to normalize things. And then, of course, with 50 Shades of Grey, that everybody was trying some light BDSM practices. So there are many, many people trying things that are more what we would, you know, used to consider kinky than ever before. And people just opening up to what their pleasure is. And again, sex becomes about pleasure and sensation, not just about intercourse or performance. It's an exploration. It's a curiosity. It's a body. You have a body. I have a body. How do I get to know your body? How do I get to know my own body in relation to you? Maybe we never have intercourse or any kind of penetrative sex, but the orgasm is intense because of the physical exploration or the psychological one. And I want to put a fine point on something you just said that I want to be careful about. We don't want people reenacting their trauma, because that's not sexual liberation either. That is being stuck in a loop, and that starts to move us into the landscape of sexual addiction and compulsivity. This should really be a sense of freedom and leaving you feeling good about yourself afterwards, not feeling shameful or degraded, or, you know, like you're back in a dissociative state.
Yeah, that's, I'm really glad you came in with that, because what I come across sometimes in is this reoccurring themes within when something's unresolved. It shows up in their explorations, and there's a disassociation that can happen, or there can be, and there's like it's not pleasure. It's like you're haunted
right.
somehow. There's a haunting, and there's something there that doesn't sit well, and it's sometimes not expressed.
Right. You're also checked out.
Yeah. Can you share a little bit about? I think this is another subject I would love to go into in greater detail in a future episode. But yeah, like I suppose my question would be, what would be one experience that you've saw or that you meet within your work where someone goes through a process like that, where for the people listening, maybe they don't know what that is. What is a disassociated state? What is it when it doesn't feel exactly? Like, just to expand that slightly, just for the listener.
Well, you know, in Sex Addicts Anonymous, they talk about being in the bubble. And that's, you know, old language from when that fellowship was started, I think in the 80s or maybe earlier. And it's really pointing to this feeling of being checked out, spaced out. It's almost like you have tunnel vision and all you care about is getting into the sexual experience. And it doesn't matter who it's with. You know, maybe you've found somebody on the internet, or it's an anonymous hookup, and that person doesn't look anything like their picture, and you're kind of grossed out, but you do it anyway. And this can be, an extreme example of this might be a boy that was molested when he was prepubescent, 10, 11, maybe 12 years old, and performed oral sex on an adult male. That boy is now a man who identifies as heterosexual, but he keeps having sex with men in public places. And he feels humiliated and degraded afterwards. But the excitation of it is so intense because it's swaddled in shame and danger and taboo, and it feels wrong. So he can't stop doing it, but he hates himself afterwards. And feels like just all the shame from the original wound comes back time and time again. And he's in a vicious cycle of compulsion that he can't stop. And these are attractor states in the brain and in the body, and they've got to be interrupted. And that's what recovery does. It interrupts those patterns so the person can heal and start to move towards a different version of sexuality for themselves. And that doesn't mean that particular configuration might not always be super arousing. It's just a question of what the person decides to do with it. Do they decide to normalize it and not, be doing it in a compulsive way with other men? Or do they decide they really don't want to be with men and they want to stop the trauma, essentially? So it's so different for every person.
Yeah.
And with females, it can play out similarly also. However she might have been tampered with sexually is what she's going to seek in these furtive, taboo, shaming experiences, typically with men that are not emotionally available. And she's left time and time again, hating herself and then thinking that all men are horrible, but she keeps picking the same guy essentially over and over again. And so if anybody's doing anything that is patterned, compulsive, you keep getting the same results, you're left feeling lonely and shameful, you probably have some sort of problem or trauma that you're repeating, and you don't know how to get to be sexually healthy. And generally people need professional help, or they need a 12-step program to get out of that.
Yeah, it's I had a client about 6 months ago, and she was a 68-year-old woman, and she was on her 11th marriage. And
Wow.
and she says, I'm thinking maybe there's a part here that I need to look at, but I've been having troubles, sexually.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same, different face, same place.
Right, that's
And
right.
it was very courageous. She was a courageous woman to come in the door to start to talk about something that was a lifetime of haunting and sort of struggle that never seemed to go away.
Right.
But yes, seek out professional help. If there's something repeating, or if there's something just doesn't feel right, and something you don't understand. It's like the golden word here is communication, or reaching out to somebody, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because like you said earlier, you can't do this yourself. There are a lot of things we can do ourselves, like, maybe fix a kitchen sink or make a meal, but you cannot deal with these sexual shames and traumas by yourself. I've never seen anybody be able to do it, because human beings need a witness. We need someone sitting opposite us who cares, who will listen, who will give us constructive feedback, who's not judging us, that can help usher us through that portal, if you will, from sickness to wellness. And it's not rocket science. It's really painful, but no one escapes their suffering in this lifetime. We all have to go through it. It's part of our growth and development. And if you're on a spiritual path, or a path of self-awareness, you're going to hit painful patches. I mean, you live in a land of poets that write about these things, and philosophers, right? I mean, it's the nature of life. Right? And you have this gorgeous landscape that was just assaulted by nature last week. And it's like the dark night of the soul. We all have what was it called? It was the storm called Eugene, right? So we all have our Eugene moments. We have to, so that we can get through those, so that the sun can shine. And I like to tell people also that you're not damaged, you're not broken, you're just wounded. And you've got to get the wound tended to.
Yeah, they're not broken, but they come from a failed environment,
Right.
a non-responsive environment. That now, as an adult, let's move towards those responsive environments, and to be able to have something new that could happen, and where you can change and improve and deepen your relationship with yourself and others and world, and have this thing called pleasure is running alongside you and in you and around you. And for the people listening, like, what would that be like? And I'm going to slowly transition out here to end the podcast today, but I want you to start thinking about this question, like, what would it be like to have more pleasure in your life? What would it be like to be able to be more communicative to the person or the persons that you have love towards? What would it be like to have some more va-va-voom in the bedroom, where you come alive and it's not deadening or discharging? If you would like to explore this more, this is what we're going to set up on a monthly basis. We're going to move in and out of these topics, only spend specific sessions in particular themes, so we can help you more get inspired and empowered, and maybe even curious to move towards, I suppose, move out of just a fascination. Well, this feels, I've got some struggles, this kind of feels kind of good, and you can play with it. So we move from a sort of fascination into, okay, maybe I can do something about it. That would be my sort of longing for anybody who is hearing this, that feels there is a need for some help in this department, that we move out of the fascination about it to some small step towards a happening that maybe wouldn't have happened before.
We mentioned Patrick Carnes earlier. For those who don't know, he is sort of the father of sex addiction treatment. And he says that there comes a point where every addict, and I would say every person, has to come to their own rescue. And I think that's a very beautiful statement. We have to come to our own rescue. Nobody's going to come get us. We're adults now. And, on this matter of pleasure, in the tantric tradition, pleasure is not just about sexual pleasure. It's in all areas of life. So every time you take a walk and feel the sun on your face, or you're holding a warm cup of tea on a cold morning, see if you can experience just the sheer pleasure of that moment. And it starts with these small moments where we can start to take in pleasure, and we're not whisking past all of that because our focus is on porn. It's just pornographic, right? When body parts are disembodied, when it's just about getting off, it's pornographic. That same sex act, if you've got eyeball to eyeball, heart to heart connection, you're embodied, is a very different experience, right?
It's a completely different landscape.
Yeah, I would suggest that today you all think about, the moments of pleasure that you have throughout your day.
And if you're realizing that you're not having any, then let's start looking to slow down and capture the breeze on the cheek. Because this, if you're living in Ireland or the UK at the moment, there's plenty of breeze coming in, so you can feel how you're being moved or touched by that, or having a walk, and let your free child go as you kick leaves into the space. Like, how, let yourself go into that. Let yourself explore. Even thinking about what we're starting to talk about, starting to feel what that would feel like, to have more pleasure in multiple of ways, and in ways that could be more sexual and more communicative. And another topic that I would love for us to talk about later on, Doc, is just this whole thing about how we can sort of penetrate, the man can penetrate the woman, and the woman can emotionally, where they can just be there and say, I am here, give it to me. Let me hear your rage. Let me hear your pain. Let me hear your suffering. I am here. Let me penetrate you with my here-ness, with my presence, where I welcome all of you, all the parts, and where maybe over time I can love those parts of you that you don't love I can hold them in and closer to me, and in celebration and in admiration, and love the parts that you find hard to love within yourself. So this understanding, I suppose you talked about it slightly today, about this polarity, but I'm extending it to this emotional. So
Yeah.
I'm live talking about it at the moment, because I find it's one of the areas that's really important in this landscape of intimacy. Is this something that you also kind of
Yeah, I mean, you're really talking about, relationships as a healing forum. We're told that about this happily ever after myth, which came out of the plague, I think. May they live happily ever after, meaning may they not die and live past 30. And
Walt Disney?
so, right. But, this thing that we're talking about can only be healed in relationship with another person. Therapy can only take us so far. Sex therapy can only take us so far. But at some point, you've got to get into the arena with somebody that you want to take this journey with. And it's
Yeah.
not for the weak of heart. To be able to deeply know each other and hold each other's pain and not take it personally or get reactionary. These are really challenging, I think, demands on us as we are trying to evolve the species. Because look, sex used to be for procreation, period. That's why animals do it. And now we're endeavoring to have this face-to-face, close-in intimacy, evolving sexually into our 7th and 8th decades now. It's a grand human experience, really.
It's it's a big deal. So
It's a
anybody's
big
watching
deal.
needs some help with that.
We
And
all need help with it.
yeah, and I was thinking back, it was the 80s where contraception was banned in Ireland.
Wow.
It was like only for procreation,
Yeah, not that long ago.
no. So we haven't gone so far from those sort of beliefs and sort of
Let's look at what
cultural and
happened.
social.
But when you look at what happened, it's like, okay, so now we get to have free sex. It's not just for procreation, but nobody told us how. So now it's kind of boring. And it's like, yeah, we should have just left it the way it was, right? Because there's no roadmap for, well, what else could it be? And how do we get curious about what else it is? And what is sensuality? That's really what I was pointing to earlier. And that's the first step. What is sensuality? Touch, pleasure, that's
Like that.
non-sexual, non-genital. That's where we begin.
Yeah, what's it like to have touch where it doesn't have to go somewhere?
Yeah. And that's part of taking the pressure off the relationship, that if we hold hands, if we cuddle, then that means we have to have sex, as opposed to, no, we're just here together.
What a wonderful way for us to leave,
Mm.
to depart into our days now, is just allow that to be something to whet the appetite. Like, what would that be like? What would that be like to start to think about that? And again, for anybody who's watching and you're feeling something and something's moving, something's coming alive, something you resonate with, reach out for help if you need it, or talk to somebody about what you're experiencing. If you know somebody who's struggling, please share, like, and comment, or share this video with someone who's struggling in a relationship that's maybe happening right now. It really, that would be a beautiful gift. And if you're liking what we're doing and you would like us to ask or have specific topics where you're really deeply interested in, please message Wellbeings or anywhere on my Facebook feed, or message the doctor and any of her contacts, so that we can really help and be of service to you. But for now, that's a lot to think about and percolate over until we meet again. We're going to meet on a monthly basis, Doc. So I think that's what we've decided.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Nigel. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you.